Good evening, scholars friends, and my students who are present in this virtual platform. Now, today we are happy to Jyoti Biswas between us. Uh, if we try to introduce in few words about Jyoti Biswas, then we must say that, or we must consider that Jyoti Biswas is not a research scholar, but above all, he is a very good human being. Mr. Jyoti Biswas has completed his undergraduate and postgraduate studies in English literature at the University of Calcutta in 2013 and 2015, respectively. He completed MPhil at the Department of English Studies, Central University of Tamil Nadu in 2021. And now he is pursuing PhD Department of English Studies, Central University of Jharkhand, and his research area is rituals of Namashudra community. And apart from all these, his research interests include ritual studies, culture studies, mythology, folkloristics, comparative religion, philosophy, and anthropology. Now, today, Mr. Jyoti Biswas will present his insightful talk about an ethnographic documentation of Chamar caste by Dr. James Weiss. I cordially invite Mr. Jyoti Biswas to present his talk. Now, Jyoti Biswas, the stage is yours. Welcome, Jyoti Biswas. It's very good to see you. And now it's your time to present. Hope for the best. You may carry on your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Palash, for your kind introduction. All right.
Yes, sure. You're audible.
So, is it echoing? Is my voice echoing?
No, it's quite fine. I will mute my microphone, then it will be okay and fine.
Okay.
Please carry on.
Thank you. So, scholars friends, good evening. Since already my introduction has been provided to you, so I don't need to waste any time. I just want to give you a rough outline of my presentation. And first, I will give an introduction about the problem of the knowledge sources. I mean, when we are going to the universities and colleges, very often we see in the syllabus the recommended readings and different entries in different departments, whether political science or history or anthropology or literature. And we read, go through all these texts. So first I will talk about the problems of the knowledge sources, especially problems that Bahujan scholars are facing while developing the cultural narrative of their communities. Second, I will talk about briefly about ethnography. What do we mean by ethnography? Ethnographic methodologies. And then I will briefly talk about the about Dr. James Weiss, because as per my title of the presentation is concerned, I am going to reflect on the ethnographic documentation that Dr. James Weiss recorded in second half of 19th century in Bengal. And then I will directly come to the documentation of Chamar caste and the different aspects that Dr. James Weiss recorded. Right. So, friends, very often we encounter the concept of post-colonial discourse, that post-colonial discourse creates some sort of a meta-narrative that whatever existed in India before 1947 was very bad, was full of oppression, and at the same time not quite representative of what India is. And the era post 1947 India, which very often is known as independent India, although I myself do not believe that India is independent, Because my simple logic is, if from 1757 to 1947, India is ruled by British government, the British people, simply ruled by British, then the India after 1947 has been ruling by Brahmins. Simple as that. This is very easy to understand if you want to understand. And if you want to make it complicated, then it will go on. The post-colonial discourse always discredits the contributions of administrative officers who, through discussions and very minute study of the life of the people, recorded their valuable documentations. I mean, we know very well that in Bengal or in any other provinces, there are many administrative officers who, besides dispatching their administrative duties, also did a great favor to us to write about the people that they encountered. So we find many administrative officers going to the villages, and with the help of the translator or intermediator, writes the detailed life of the people, the man-woman relation, their profession, their financial status, and at the same time, the rituals and songs. And if we focus on the idea of Indian scholarship, then no doubt the concept of modern Indian scholarship rests on the scholarship laid down by British scholars, whether it's a Buddhist studies or whether it's a comparative study, Sanskrit study, or even anthropology and modern sciences. We have to acknowledge the contributions of the British scholars and how they laid down the foundation of modern knowledge system. But in post-colonial studies, we find a very, I would like to say, bizarre arguments that in the name of post-colonial, they created some sort of a binary between native and foreign. And whatever was there in pre-colonial India, I mean in colonial India rather, they identify it as an influence of foreign rule. But if you stick to the binary of foreign and native, then you have to recognize that before the arrival of the British, India was ruled by the Muslims. Before the arrival of Muslims, even if we try to contextualize our talk in the Aryan, non-Aryan divide, then you have to recognize the fact, as Swami Dharmatirtha has rightly points out in his book, History of Hindu Imperialism, that India has been ruling by Brahmins. So if you stick to the ruler-ruled native-foreign binary in the post-colonial studies, then you have to acknowledge the fact that long before the arrival of the British rulers, India was ruled by Muslims, and long before the arrival of Muslim rulers, India was ruled by Brahmins. That's why I believe that that sort of binary, who is a native and who is a foreigner, is quite insignificant to me. I, as a scholar, is grateful that the British people came here to introduce modern education, and in this way, they did a great benefit to the untouchable classes. With this particular note, I want to say the source I am using for my presentation is the source created by British administrators, and who, according to me, are the great scholars and the great benefactors to all of us. Okay. Now, I want to give a brief introduction about what do we mean by the concept ethnography, because after all, we have to understand some terms and terminologies of anthropology in order to understand that how ethnography and ethnology developed in India, and how the ethnographic writings, ethnological documentations laid down the foundation of modern anthropological studies in Indian universities. Ethnography, the study of people in a natural setting, provides an opportunity for researchers to conduct a detailed study of a group of people while being immersed in the culture of that group. Ethnography derives from Greek word ethnos, meaning people or folk, and graphy, meaning to write down. Ethnography is referred to the participant observation or field research. It involves the study of the people of an organization through the face-to-face interaction of a real-life social setting. So ethnography primarily means the proper documentation of a specific group of people, and in this documentation, a researcher who is getting engaged in this particular job has to stay over there for a couple of months, couple of years, and learn the language if possible, and stay with them, eat with them, and at the same time get engaged with the ritual and other customs that the community members celebrate. So ethnography, in many ways, we can say that it's a participant observation, that a participant has to get into the research fieldwork among any particular community in any particular geographical location, and he has to stay over there, and in this way record the life and world and its meaning. And in the recording, he might use his notebook, he might use his videography, he might use his photographic devices, and in this way he can record the day-to-day life of the people, especially focusing on the rituals, their songs, and the other essential aspects that constitute their culture. Well, and interesting fact is that uh, in ethnographic methodology, what is more important is, the most cognitive mode is observation. A researcher who is known as a ethnographer has to observe, close observe, and in the observation, the researcher has to put aside his or her bias, his or her own personal interpretation. In ethnographic research, the very objective perspective is required to apply. So despite having that sort of a distinction between the culture identity of the researcher to that of the culture and identity of the people, the researcher has to put aside the bias that they have. Say, for example, very often it is found that in most of the cases when researchers go there, they found some very awkward food habit. So to this researcher, this food habit might not be a part of his daily meal. But when he is coming to the community and going deeper into their life, the researcher has to bear with all these odds that he or she is facing. So in this sense, ethnography, especially its methodology is concerned, requires that the researcher will establish a direct relation with the social actors or the people among whom he is working. The researcher or the ethnographer will have to stay in the natural environment with them. The researcher will observe and describe their behavior with his academic knowledge, academic training. The researcher will interact with them, and if there is a language barrier, then the researcher has to take an intermediator, a translator, who will translate the messages that the native people will deliver to him. And then, of course, learning the code or the meaning of their behavior, and in this way try to understand the cultural difference that they have. So now, in this particular sense, I would like to say that right from the British rule, right from the time of Warren Hastings, a great deal was undertaken to properly understand the language, culture, customs, and social structures of India. So right from Warren Hastings till very 1947, I must say, a lot of initiatives had been taken to properly document the life of people of different castes and tribes of different provinces. So William Wilson Hunter was provided the authority of framing the statistical survey of Bengal. And in 20 volumes, he prepared the statistical survey of Bengal. And later on, we come to know many other great anthropologists, many other ethnographers, and at the same time, many administrative rulers who prepared the, I would like to say, factual documentations, the factual details about the life. Say, for example, the man-woman relation, man-woman statistics, then a number of children in the family, the number of educated people in family, and then of course the social status, the professions, the different categories, and of course the rituals and songs. So all of these were later on documented. And in this particular sense, I would like to highlight two or a few important texts that help us understand that how the documentation of the people of different provinces were recorded. There are few great number of texts, such as The Tribes and Castes of Central Provinces of India by Robert Vane Russell in 4 volumes, published in 1916. Then Monograph on the Leather Industry by C.G. Chenevix. And then The Tribes and Castes of the Northwestern Provinces and Oudh by William Crook, published in 1896. And then Census reports of different periods, and of course the important books on census operations. Here I want to say a few words about census operations that we come to know about Indian people, especially those castes and tribes who have never been provided the right to education. That means those castes and tribes who never represented their own community. That in the census reports that was officially introduced in 1872, that right from 1872 till the last caste census in 1931, we see a whole range of texts, documents introducing us with the people, introducing us with the different castes, their names, their social status, and more importantly, the demographic statistics, the rituals, the proverbs, the festivals. So all these, census reports played a very important role, and based on which the British rulers, British administrators of different provinces, especially Bengal in this case, wrote down their ethnographic writings. So with this particular note, I want to come to the topic, that is the Chamar caste. Now, first of all, I want to say that Supreme Court of India in 2005 has given a verdict that the very word Chamar is abusive, and we must abstain from using this word Chamar. But I am using this word Chamar because Dr. James Weiss, about the text I'm going to analyze, uses the word Chamar. But I know very well that nowadays the particular caste members introduce themselves as Ravidashi. So we are respectful to what the cultural heritage that they have with their new religious identity. We are very much respectful, but I'm using the word Chamar with the sense of insulting anyone. So this is the first thing that I want to say all of that. I am not going to insult anyone by using word Chamar. But I'm using because Dr. James Weiss has retained this word in his documentation, and his book was published way back in 1883. So I'm using the word Chamar. Now, with this particular note that the British administrators, with the help of the census reports, prepared a great deal of ethnographic documentations, where we, for the first time, come across the whole new life of different castes and tribes, their names, their professions, their social status, and many other details. With this particular note, we have seen that there are many administrative rulers, such as Dr. James Weiss, Sir Herbert Hooke, and many others, who prepared the ethnographic documentations about different castes and tribes that they found in Bengal province. One among them is, of course, Chamar. But we know very well that Chamar is basically a Hindustani tribe. Okay, this is more or less documented in most of the, caste documentations, that Chamar, this particular community, has their origin in the I would like to say in the Hindustani belt, Hindi belt. Okay, fine. The word Chamar is derived from Sanskrit charmakara, means a leather worker. And if you want to get the reference, then I would like to request you to note down the English Sanskrit English dictionary prepared by Arthur Anthony MacDonald in 1893. Again, I would like to cite the name of the book, Sanskrit English Dictionary, compiled by Arthur Anthony MacDonald in 1893. MacDonald was a great Sanskrit scholar, and in page number 92, you find this reference that the word Chamar derived from the word Charmakara, means leather worker. Okay, there are many other synonymous words that we encounter to identify this particular community, such as Muchi, Ravidasi, and Rishi. In Banglapedia, it is mentioned, let me quote from Banglapedia, that Rishi সম্প্রদায়ের মানুষেরা বাংলাদেশের কোন কোন অঞ্চলে, বিশেষ করে উত্তরবঙ্গে, রুইদাস নামে পরিচিত. To paraphrase it in English, that the community people belong to Rishi are known as Ruidas in some of the northern part of Bengal. But interesting fact, nowadays we see the resurgence of Ravidashiya movement. Although Saint Ravidas was born in medieval period, the date is ascribed around 1450. But in 19th century, around in Uttar Pradesh, around 1850, we encountered, a new religious movement which is known as Ravidashiya movement, and the Ravidashi identity. I already told you that nowadays Chamars identify themselves as Ravidashi, and this Ravidashi goes back to life and work of Saint Ravidas. The Ravidashi identity traces its root in the life and work of Saint Ravidas. Ravidashiya religious movement, or Ravidasi Panth, which is known as Ravidashi Panth, in the early 20th century around North India, was based on the religious teachings of Saint Ravidas, who it is believed was born in a Chamar community. Most of the Chamars adhere to Ravidashiya, and many of them replace the traditional surname Das with Ravidas. But the Chamar population is mostly found in Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Bihar, and West Bengal. In 1872 census of northwestern provinces, their population figure was 38,70,801. It is mentioned by W.C. Plowden that two great castes, the Chamars and the Ahirs, contain nearly 1/3 of the other castes. W.C. Plowden divided Hindu population into different categories. One is the Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Baniya, and rest of them were categorized as other castes. And almost 1/6 of the Hindu population. So in most of the northern belt, Chamar is a very populous and very well organized community, as it is recorded way back in 1872. It was recorded in 1872 census of northwestern provinces that in some cases the particular caste is lost sight of in the occupation it pursues. For instance, the term Muchi has in many districts displaced the more proper caste designation Chamar. So the ethnographers and the administrative rulers were actually trying to document the loss of different caste name and replacing the caste name with something new. So we've in Bahujan studies we read some episodes that from around the last decades of 19th century, different castes sought to replace their caste name, which they identified as a derogated. So it's same thing happened here. Somebody is acknowledging them as Chamar, somebody is not using the word Chamar, but they are using the word Muchi. And now we see that all of them are trying to introduce themselves as Ravidasi. So this is in one way or the other the movement that I would like to say towards the embracing a better understanding of their identity, better name of their identity. In 1872 census reports of Bengal, H. Beverley wrote, that Muchi is chiefly a Bengali title. Okay, so kindly follow. This is written by H. Beverley, who prepared the first census report of Bengal, that 1872. Uh, that Muchi is chiefly a Bengali title, although it found a small proportion in Bihar. They formed a majority as a horse keepers and cart drivers, palanquin bearers. They hold small portion of village land and is invariably called to post of official notices. It is recorded in 1872 census reports that most of the Chamars were employed as drum beaters who used to beat the drum and travel from one village to another in order to announce the government notices. It is recorded in the Tribes and Castes of Central Provinces of India in volume 2 that Chamar is a caste of tanners and manual laborers in northern India. Their demographic figure in 1911 census is 9 lakh. Okay, fine. So these are some of the important inputs that we find in some census reports. And as I told you, that all these census reports actually helped many administrative officers to jot down the details about the different castes and tribes. And in this way, they did a great job that now in 2022, we are able to read the life of different castes and tribes in 19th century Bengal, how they used to celebrate the rituals, what was their social status, and at the same time, what was the cultural aspects of their life. So all these details, which is recorded, I mean, in the book that I'm going to discuss by Dr. James Weiss, will be found in abundance. With this particular note, I want to, but before I conclude, I want to just give one quotation from Herbert Hope Risley. This is very important. The Chamars trace their own pedigree in Ravi or Ravidas, the famous disciple of Ramananda at the end of 14th century. And whenever a Chamar is asked, so note, it is being written by Sir Herbert Hope Risley in around 1880s, that whenever a Chamar is asked what he is, he replies, a Ravidasi. As I told you, nowadays, it is a great movement, right, to replace the derogatory name with a new one. So they found that the name Ravidasi is a more honorific, more honorary, rather than Chamar or Muchi. Okay. So with this, now I want to give a brief introduction about the author, Dr. James Weiss. Okay, fine. James Fons Norton Weiss, or popularly known as Dr. James Weiss, born in 1835 and died in 1886, was appointed as a medical officer in Dhaka in erstwhile East Bengal around 1860s. Okay. So always, try to understand the time period when Dr. James Weiss was living here in Bengal and trying to write his ethnographic documentation. He served his duties for 13 years. Besides medical science, he also earned reputation of being an encoder of some of the inscriptions that resulted his meeting with Sir Alexander Cunningham during his visit to Sonargaon and Vikrampura in 1871-72. Three of his writings are available, namely Notes on Races, Castes and Trades of Eastern Bengal, published privately in 1883, a major ethnographic work on different castes and their cultural aspects, including many subcategorizations of Bengali Muslims living in East Bengal, and two articles he submitted in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1874. His two writings are Notes on Sonargaon and Notes on Barabhuia. Okay, so this is an introduction about Dr. James Weiss. Now, the text I am going to deal with, where I have found the entry on Chamar caste, is Notes on Races, Castes and Trades of Eastern Bengal. Again, I repeat the text: Notes on Races, castes and traits of Eastern Bengal. And this text recently has been translated into Bangla by a great scholar from Bangladesh. So you can search this in Google. I hope you find this reference of the Bangla translation. Okay. In the introduction, Dr. James Weiss specifically locates the habitat around which he conducted his research fieldwork. Okay. Let me quote from his book. This tract, situated between the rivers Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna, is an irregular triangle. On the north is Maimansingh, on the east Tipera, on the south Bakirganj, and on the west Faridpur. Okay. So this is the geographical area in which he primarily dispatched his medical duties. But as I told you, since he stayed over there around from 1860s, I mean around 24 years, because Dr. James Weiss left India and went to England in 1884. So right from 1860 to 1884, he spent his time here as a medical officer. And during his stay, he came across many people, he came across many tribes and castes. And with the help of some translators, he tried to portray the life. And now I'm going to discuss about what he wrote about Chamar community. Well, well, this is from page number 251 to 256. So from 251 to 256, Dr. James Weiss documented the life and world of Chamar caste. So I'm going to read some important sections, and if time permits me, I'll explain. And in this way, I'll justify why we have to read what Dr. Atul Krishna Biswas once told me, the colonial archive. But I would like to say it is not colonial archive, it's the British archives. The administrative records of different administrators of different provinces in India. Why we, these young scholars of the Bahujan Society, must go through all these official documents in order to understand the society better. Okay. Dr. James Weiss writes, but before I read, I would like to give you the outline that the first I will give an introduction about the location and demography of Chamar caste, and then the theory of their origin and social status, and then their Ravidashiya identity and new religious outlook, and then the division among the Chamars, because among the Chamar caste, the way this division was there among Namashudras, Chandals as also. There are 7 categories of Chamars that Dr. James Weiss documented, and then the food habit of Chamars, and then their profession, and then more importantly their religious, social, and domestic rituals. So in these 7 categories, I want to discuss the entry of Dr. James Weiss. So first comes the location and demography. Dr. James Weiss writes, this Hindustani tribe is found in all parts of Bengal, living apart in villages of their own, everywhere following the same customs and prosecuting the same trade. So he at the beginning mentioned this is a Hindustani tribe. So as I told you that Chamar is primarily Hindustani tribe, but later on they migrated to Bengal because of doing some work, and in this way they became some sort of a Bengali culture, if not Bengali culture, the caste of Bengal rather. They became a caste of Bengal, if not Bengali. So they are primarily Hindustani tribe. This is all. The northwest provinces is the home of the Chamar. Follow the language. So Dr. James Weiss is giving us a clue of the original homeland of Chamars. That is, the northwest provinces is the homeland of Chamar. That means the land of Kanshiram. Kanshiram belong to northwestern province, I mean from Punjab. So land of Kanshiram could be identified as the original home of Chamar. And there are many sayings that Saint Ravidas is also a saint along the line of Guru Nanak also. Okay? say among the Punjabi Chamars, there is a perception. The Northwest provinces is the home of the Chamar, and in 1865 they numbered 35 lakh 80,385 individuals. In Bihar, again, according to the census of 1872, there were 7 lakh 11,721, while in Bengal proper, Chamars and Rishis only numbered 3 lakh 93,490. Okay. So this is more or less their demography and at the same time their location. And we found that the Chamar is basically a caste originated in the northwestern province. Then we know very well that in a Brahminical society there are so many theories regarding the origin of different castes and tribes, that in Brahminical scriptures written in mainly Sanskrit, that we encounter many interpretations of how this particular caste originated. Importantly, there are two texts that I would like to highlight, or I would like to request all of you to read. One is the Brihad Dharma Purana, and other is the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. They are two sub-Puranas. And if you read the Brihad Dharma Purana, then in the last two chapters of the Brihad Dharma Purana, you find that how this particular Purana, the writers of this Purana rather, are giving details of how different castes is being created. We know this is all bullshit, all nonsense, but these texts will help us understand how in 12th and 13th centuries all these interpretations of different of the origin of different castes are being recorded. The Chamar is descended, according to the Puranas, from a boatman and a Chandaloman. But Manu represents them as being Nishada or outcast, the offspring of a Brahmin and a Shudra mother, a Brahmin man and a Shudra woman. In Audh at the present day, their descent is traced to the fabulous hero Nikada and Devghar or Kuriyar Om. So there are some interpretations, the Puranic interpretations about their origin. And right now we want to say that we do not acknowledge with this Puranic interpretation of the origin of Chamars, the way we do not acknowledge the interpretation of the origin of Namashudra community as given in the Puranas or scriptures. Okay. Now I want to say that how the particular community is being divided into different sections. But before that, we need to, remind all of us that nowadays Chamar identified themselves as Ravidashiya. So here Dr. James Weiss also recorded. The Chamars trace their own pedigree to Ravi or Rai or Ravidas, the famous disciple of Ramananda at the end of 14th century. And whenever a Chamar is asked what he is, he replies himself as a Ravidas. Okay, so this is very valuable input that Dr. James Weiss recorded in 1883. Okay. Now there are 7 categories that Dr. James Weiss found among Chamars. They are Jatua, Kulaha, Jaiswara, Jhusia, Dohar, Kanaujia, and Kol. These are the different, subcategories. And it is understood that all of these categories are basically based on the professions, or maybe based on some family traditions. Well, now I want to talk about some habits and food that Dr. James Weiss found among Chamars. He writes that large droves of pigs are bred by them, and it is no uncommon sight to witness children and pigs wallowing together in the mire. Hides in various stages of preparation hang about the hut. Chamars eat both beef and pork. Follow the references. Chamars eat both beef and pork, and like the European gypsies, have no repugnance to cooking the flesh of animals dying naturally. One thing that I want to share with all of you is that food habit is one of the central, central indices rather, to understand the social stratification of different castes and tribes. So pork in the Hindu tradition, so to say, eating pork is not only prohibited, it is considered as the most polluted job. Eating pork is a polluted thing. It is the impure thing. So if you find that some castes develop the pork eating habit, then you identify this particular caste is far away from the periphery of what is known as Indo-Aryan or Hindu society, because eating pork is, according to many anthropologists, and especially those who did a fundamental study on food habit as a route to understand cultural identity. According to them, the pork eating habit among different castes, the untouchable castes, so-called untouchable caste or scheduled castes, nowadays scheduled castes, is an indication that all of them belong to non-Aryan communities. So this is one indication that pork eating habit establishes the fact that this particular caste belong to non-Aryan community. Now you may identify them as Mulnivashi or Bahujan, whatever. But eating pork, pork eating habit is a very, very important clue, and we find it in the book of Dr. James Weiss. That pork eating habit establishes the fact that Chamar caste belong to non-Aryan groups. And in this particular sense, I want to compare the data that the pork eating habit is also found among Chandals and Namashudras. So in this sense, we can also extend our argument by saying that Chandals and Namashudras also belong to non-Aryan castes. We find the pork eating habit among Bagdis also. We find the pork eating habit among Santals also. So all of them belong to this quote unquote non-Aryan group of people. So this is something that is very, very important. Profession. The following professions are found among Chamars: leather work, scavenging, peeling off skins of dead animal, musicians, palanquin bearers, midwifery, witchcraft. Some of the musical instruments found among Chamars are dhol or dholak, tasha, and ektara. Now I want to talk a great deal about the rituals, whether religious, social, or domestic, of Chamars. And I would like to say that this particular text, Notes on Castes, Notes on Races, Castes, and Trades of Eastern Bengal, is a very, very important text to understand the rituals of different categories found among different unrepresented Bahujan castes and tribes. That by reading this particular book, we will understand how in the 18th century or even before that, this particular group of people celebrated their rituals and songs, and it is by studying the rituals and songs along with studying the food habit, then we better understand their ethnic origin. Again, I repeat, food habit and rituals, folk rituals, food habit and folk rituals are two very important cultural items that will help you go deeper into the cultural antiquity of any particular caste or tribe. And in this particular case, when we already divided our society into Brahminical or Aryan and non-Aryan, although there are debates whether Aryans are foreigners or Aryans are native, but we don't want to go into that debate because we know there's two sides of that. One group of scholars support the Aryan migration theory. One group of scholars do not support the Aryan migration theory. But despite the fact that we know very well that it is by studying the food habit and, more importantly, some of the folk rituals that we can better understand how the non-Aryan faiths, non-Aryan beliefs were prevailing among those castes. This is very important. Okay, now I just want to read some important sections and reflect on it. Regarding religious, social, and domestic rituals of the Chamar caste, Dr. James Weiss has recorded many important inputs. Very, very important to me as well, because I'm doing my research on rituals and cultural studies. So it is of great importance. Dr. James Weiss writes, they have no Purohit. Their religious ceremony is being directed by one of their elders. So this is very important. The Chamars, as recorded by Dr. James Weiss in the second half of 19th century, Chamars did not invite any Brahmins to officiate any kind of ritual in their society or in their home. So this is very important. And now, who I actually officiates the ritual? The elders of the family, elders of the community. So this is very social aspect of their belief. He writes, Chamars have always exhibited a remarkable dislike to Brahmins and to the Hindu rituals. But it is also recorded that they observed many rites, many rituals, popularly regarded as of Hindu origin. But it is Dr. James writes, but all these rituals were probably festivals of the village gods kept for ages before the Aryan invasion. If you just read if you go through some important books regarding the primitive belief system of some of the tribes, and if you go to the lifestyle of some of the scheduled castes, say for example, Bagdis, Chamars, then you find that among them some of the folk rituals are still prevailing, and all these folk rituals will help you understand the concept of folk belief, concept of folk deity, concept of folk tradition, concept of oral tradition transmitting from one generation down to another. This is very important. The large majority of the Bengali Chamars belong to the Satnarayani sect, and sons or holy men are very numerous among them. Furthermore, the Mahant of that sect is always regarded as the religious head of the whole tribe. It shows that among the Chamars, they identify someone as the head of their society, because at the beginning we came to know that they, the elders of their society, officiate the religious rituals. Okay, the principal annual festival of Chamar. This now we are going to detailed analysis of the different rituals that Chamars actually celebrate. The principal annual festival of the Chamar is Sat Panchami, when they abstain from work for 2 days, spending in alternative devotion and in intoxication at home. Another festival is the Ram Navami. But interesting fact is that if I read the entire quotation from Dr. James Weiss, then you find the contradiction. He says that another important festival found among Chamars is Ram Navami. So let me see what Dr. James Weiss writes. Then you find the contradiction. Another festival is the Ram Navami, or birthday of Rama, held on the 9th lunar day of the Chaitra, when they offer flowers, betel nut, and sweetmeats to their ancestors, the Ravidas. That means the festival known as Ramanavami, but they are offering their sweets, betel nuts to Ravidas. Now, here you find that either you have to represent Ravidas as a historical figure, or you have to acknowledge Ravidas as a mythological figure. Here we find how Brahminical priesthood, how Brahminical society, how Brahminical caste system tries to mythify, divinize historical figures. The way we see that Siddhartha Gautama, Lord Buddha, was made as the 9th avatar of Vishnu. So a man, a historic man, was later on was turned into a divine being. So here, if Dr. James Weiss writes like that, then we can explain that although they are offering their sweets and flowers to Ravidas ji, but this festival is called as Ramanavami. So it is some sort of a Brahminical interpretation of the ritual. We can come to a conclusion. Okay, fine. Okay. Dr. James Weiss writes that when sickness or epidemic diseases invade their homes, the women fasten a piece of plantain leaf round their necks and go about begging. Should their wishes be fulfilled, a vow is taken to celebrate the worship of Devi Shitala. So another ritual is celebration of Shitala Devi. Now, in this celebration is this particular Devi is celebrated because to drive away the pandemics or harmful diseases. And this is another element. I already told you that it is by studying some of their folk rituals, it is by studying some of their folk gods and goddesses, then we better understand the cultural antiquity and ethnic antiquity of different caste and tribe. And here, living in most of rural Bengal, living in and around the villages where both children and pigs are playing together, uh, harmful diseases might break out. So when the harmful diseases breaks out, the women do celebrate this particular ritual. They worship the Shitala with the belief that if they worship the Shitala, then this harmful disease will go away, that their children will not be infected with this. And you try to understand that how all these rituals have nothing to do with the Hindu pantheon, Durga, Kali, Saraswati, and others. There's no such concept of making idol of the gods and goddesses also. There's no concept of priesthood, Brahminical priesthood also. So you better try. That's why I told you that Dr. James Weiss's book is very, very important, that we have to read all of it, that how he tried to give us a very lifestyle. If nowadays we see that most of the scheduled castes have become Hinduized, if today we see that most of the scheduled castes are saying Jai Sri Ram, no matter what political implication it might be, but scheduled caste are becoming Hinduized, they are saying Jai Sri Ram. But here, by reading those ethnographic documents prepared in the second half of 19th century, then we can better understand what their original belief system was and how this original belief later on got distorted. So we can say, make a comparative study between the rituals that Chamars or Muchis celebrate now and the rituals that they used to celebrate 150 years ago. This is very important aspect. Now, here in his book, I'm coming closer, he writes a great deal about the marriage ceremony, which is very important, and there the status of women. I want to go to that. At Chamar marriages, an elder presides. As I told you, that elder always presides the domestic or social rituals. But here gives an important input, but the day of the marriage is selected by Brahmins. So you can better understand that this was an example of cultural hegemony. You cannot, after all, refute Brahmin from morning to midnight. Somehow you have to call him, because this is the social structure and we are born and brought up in that social structure. Okay. But the marriage is being officiated by the elder of the family. The father of the bride, as a rule, receives a sum of money for his daughter. This is very important. I request all of you to listen. The father of the bride, okay, Koner Baba, the father of the bride, as a rule, receives a sum of money for his daughter. It is exactly the opposite what we see right now, right? The father of the bride receives money from the bridegroom's family, Okay, so this is very important. The father of the bride receives a sum of money for his daughter. The custom is, since the bridegroom of the family of the bridegroom is asking the hand of the bride, so the family of the bridegroom has to pay a lump sum amount of money to the father of the girl. Okay. During the marriage service, the bridegroom sits on his knee of the bride's father, and the bridegroom's father receives a few ornaments and a cup of spirits, after which each of the guests is offered a cup. A Hindustani barber strains the feet of bride and bridegroom with alta. So Dr. James Weiss is giving a very detailed description of what actually took place in the marriage. So this is how you see different cultures, different castes, different cultures, different rituals, and the detailed description of making of this ritual. Now, that's why I told you that it's very important, to read all of their ethnographic writings. There might have many limitations, but they have opened up the vista of new knowledge, and they have opened up the new area of knowledge research, that how the Chamar celebrated their marriage system in 19th century Bengal is being recorded in this book. And today in 2022, we can read all of them. And in this way, we can better understand how they used to celebrate their culture. This is very, very important. Now, there are many other important aspects, especially just Dr. James Wise's this entry is very important. Now, listen to me. When an elder brother dies childless, again I repeat, when an elder brother dies childless, the younger must marry the widow after a year. Okay. If both of them do not agree to marry each other, the widow returns to her maternal home. And after the wish and consultation with her father, this widow can marry anyone. Just follow. Just think of the liberty that a woman enjoys. Very often when we read the history of modern Bengal, we read the very colorful, exaggerated description of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and the problems of sati. But this problem was there in Brahmin families. You read Ashapurna Devi's writings, novels, you find how the Brahmin families, the women of Brahmin families, the upper caste women in Brahmin families, the Brahmin families, the women of upper caste society suffered the domestic violence compared to the suffering that a woman of Brahmin families or upper caste families go through. The women of Chamar community are much more liberated, much more free. So this is a very important indication, and we can make a comparative study of the status of women after marriage in a Chamar family and the status of a woman after marriage in a Brahmin family. So if you say that there is a man called Ishwar Chandra Bandyopadhyay who fought for the right of widow, then Ishwar Chandra Bandyopadhyay fought for the right of widow because in Brahmin society, it was their problem. But this problem did not occur in Chamar family, because here you just read what Dr. James Weiss documented. If both of them, or the widow and the younger brother and the widow of the elder brother do not agree to marry each other, the widow returns to her maternal home, and after the wish and consultation with her father, can marry anyone she pleases. Just note it down. And then read the writings of novels of Ashapurna Devi, who perhaps the most faithfully represents the plight and suffering of the women in upper caste families. And then you make a comparative study. Okay. There is another interesting ritual. Chamars still observe the pleasing custom called Bhai Phota on the last day of the Hindu year, when sisters present their brothers with a new suite of clothes and sweetmeats and make with a paste of red sandalwood a dot on their forehead. So Dr. James Weiss documented this family ritual way back in 1883. It is very interesting. And then let me highlight another important aspect of the ritual, and then I will sum up my own observations. It records that the Chamar women are ceremonially unclean for 10 days subsequent to the childbirth. The 10 days after the childbirth, the Chamar woman is considered ceremonially unclean. And after the 10 days, all these clothes were taken away, all the utensils were kitchen utensils were taken away, and new kitchen utensils were brought in. And on the very 11th day, the community members organize a feast, and in this way they celebrate their domestic rituals. Dr. James Weiss also recorded many other important aspects, but here I want to conclude my presentation by saying that Dr. James Weiss, Sir Herbert of Priestley, and many other administrative rulers in the 19th century Bengal played a very important role in documenting the life and culture of those castes and tribes. who have always been neglected. You tell me, you get references of the cultural heritage of Brahmins in different books. You get the references of the cultural heritage of castes in different books. You find the references of the cultural heritage of Vaidya's in different books. You read the history of Bengal Renaissance, the Brahmins and Kolkata and others, bullshit. But my question is, if you come to the demographic structure, who are the majority people? The scheduled caste and scheduled tribes and OBCs are the majority people. Is it clear to you? I'm not, I'm not, I'm not insulting anyone, but I'm saying that where are the records? Where are the documentation? Where are the very faithful, respectful documentation of the culture of different castes and tribes? Who contributed in making this documentation? Brahmin scholars? No. You just read the Brahminical texts. You read the novels in Bangla literature. You find that Brahmin authors of Bangla literature always dehumanized the characters from lower castes. In none of the writings of Rabindranath, you don't find any single Dalit character. You can talk about Sharotchandra Chattopadhyay, but you don't find any kind of a Dalit consciousness over there. He talks about poverty, but what about caste discrimination? You hardly find. Sharotchandra did to some extent, but you hardly find. Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay wrote Kobi, fine, but you hardly find that sort of a description of the subtle critique of caste system that thousands of people were suffering from. Now, question is, there are many castes we know. Don't we know that they have their culture? Don't we know that they have their own rituals? Don't we know that they have their own customs? Don't we know that they have their own religious festivals? Here comes the point that all these British administrators recorded for the first time. It is not the Brahmin scholars, but the British administrators recorded the rituals, songs, their religious customs, religious beliefs, the demographic structure, the profession, the social status, and other aspects of the life of those castes and tribes who always suffered from Brahminical caste system. With this particular note, I want to conclude my presentation by saying that all scholars of the Bahujan society, all young scholars, should go through the ethnographic documentations, census reports, and other official documents preserved in the British period in order to come to know more about different castes, different tribes, and their culture. Because only the British people not only introduced modern education in the society, not only introduced English education in the society, but also painfully recorded all these documents, all these details rather. And it is by going through all the details and the documentation that they preserve for all of us that we are fortunate enough to know about so many things about different castes and tribes. For today, I have talked about the Chamar caste, and I have made up my mind that in next readings, if time permits me, then I will talk about many other unrepresented, marginalized castes from the book of Dr. James Weiss in similar fashion, so that we can better know the culture that they had in 19th century Bengal. With this particular note, I want to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thanks a lot. We heard and we know lots of things from these kind of observation that you try to give us right now. And I hope all the viewers who are right in this virtual platform will surely benefit it. And yes, I'm truly agree with you that beyond our familiar world, there are a lot of things that is very much caste oriented in the orientation of the society, and we know very little about them. And the kind of caste oriented society that we are living in, it is a kind of stigma that we always bearing with us. And Now this is the right time, and I think Bahujan literature, the establishment of this Bahujan literature YouTube channel and the Bahujan literature website, uh, I think you will be agree with me that our sole concern is to build a society which is very much liberal from this caste barrier. We are trying to establish an anti-casteist society where all people can hold their head high and live as human. They will not be judged by his surname. They will not be judged by his caste. And here comes the point of view in the context that is the so-called culture and merit. Later on, we'll talk about, and yes, sure. We will be happy to hear from you from lots of things related to the caste and different kinds of people and the community. And as I know personally that you are working on these particular sections and you are very much interested on this particular topic, so obviously we will happy to hear you in future. And at the same time, thank you everyone for watching this, and I hope what Jyoti has said right now, this will surely help you for your future orientation regarding this kind of caste studies. And in our group we will discuss that who will talk in next Saturday or maybe Sunday. We will let you all of you know. Thank you, good night, take care, and
Thank you.
thank
Good
you,
night. Welcome.
Jyoti,
Welcome.
once again. Thank you, you may leave please, we are concluding here.